The Checkpoints is presented by pharmaceutical company GM Pharma.
Even in the face of prolonged blackmail, the threat voiced during a telephone conversation with one of the European commissioners was shocking. During our conversation, the European commissioner listed a number of measures that Western politicians might take if the veto on the transparency law is overcome. While listing these measures, he mentioned, "You've seen what happened to Fico and you should be very careful," Prime Minister of Georgia, Irakli Kobakhidze, said in a statement. Being fully aware of the very strong pro-EU sentiment of the Georgian society during my phone conversation, I felt the need to call the attention of the Prime Minister on the importance not to inflame further the already fragile situation by adopting this law, which could lead to further polarization and to possible uncontrolled situations on the streets of Tbilisi. In this regard, the latest tragic event in Slovakia was made as an example and as a reference to where such a high level of polarization can lead in a society, even in Europe. European Commissioner for Neighbourhood and Enlargement, Oliver Varhey, responded to the Prime Minister Irakli Kobakhidze's statement. This is The Checkpoints. I'm Elena Kwangelashvili, author and the host of the show, and the Checkpoints team is ready to sum up Business and Economics Week for you. The United States of America will review the existing bilateral relations with Georgia, reads the statement from the U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken. According to the same statement, the USA has imposed a regime of sanctions in connection with the deterioration of democracy in Georgia and the adoption of Russian law. According to the statement, sanctions will be determined against the persons responsible for the aforementioned and their families, although the list of sanctioned persons has not been published yet. According to Secretary Blinken, the Department of State is implementing a new visa restriction policy for Georgia that will apply to individuals who are responsible for or complicit in undermining democracy in Georgia, as well as their family members. This includes individuals responsible for suppressing civil society and freedom of peaceful assembly in Georgia through a campaign of violence or intimidation. Here are some statements before and after the U.S. decision became public.
On May 21, the Venice Commission issued an urgent opinion on the foreign agents law in which it strongly recommends that the law be repealed in its current form, stating that its fundamental flaws will involve significant negative consequences for the freedoms of associations and expression, the right to the privacy, the right to participate in public affairs, as well as the prohibition of discrimination. The Venice Commission says that the law will affect open, informed public debate, pluralism and democracy. The Commission regrets that the highly controversial law was adopted by Parliament in disregard of the concerns of large sections of Georgian population and says this matter of proceeding does not meet the European requirements of democratic lawmaking. The Commission says that the law, ostensibly aimed at ensuring transparency, could risk stigmatization, silencing and eventually elimination of associations and media which receive even a low part of their funds from abroad. The Commission notes a strong risk is created that the associations and media which come to be affected will those who are critical of the government, so that their removal would adversely affect open, informed public debate, pluralism and democracy. If the veto of President of Georgia is overridden, it will have very clear consequences for the relationship between Georgia and the United States, said Matthew Miller, the press speaker of the State Department of United States of America. According to the press speaker of the diplomatic agency, that one of the main Washington's concern about the transparency of foreign influence law is the friendship that has been connecting the US and Georgia for decades. We are incredibly concerned about this law. Part of the reason for this is the excellent friendship that exists between America and Georgia. If you look back over the past 30 years, our two countries, two peoples had great connections. We fully supported Georgia's Euro-Atlantic aspirations. We fully supported further integration with the road steps taken to expand democracy. That's why when we see a step back like this, when we see a law passed that is quite clearly based on existing laws in Russia, which we have seen supporting actions from countries in Russia's orbit, it worries us very seriously. Not only the United States and not only members of the European community, but primarily Georgian people are seriously concerned. You will see this if you look at the flows of opposition and protect it. The streets of Georgia. Without a doubt, if Georgia takes this step, if the veto of president is overridden, it will have a very clear consequences for relationship between Georgia and the US. This will have an impact on the relationship between other European states and Georgia, and ultimately on Georgian European aspirations, said Miller. Congressman Bill Keating responds to the recent developments in Georgia, noting that visa restrictions and bilateral relationships review signal USA's commitment to Georgian people who seek an European future. Yesterday, during an House foreign hearing, I asked Secretary Blinken about the Kremlin-inspired foreign agents legislation in Georgia. Today's announcement of visa restrictions and bilateral relations review signaled our commitment to Georgian people who see a European future, Congressman Bill Keating wrote on Twitter, formerly known as X. Former U.S. Ambassador to Georgia, John Bass, reacts to the Secretary of State's announcement of sanctions, saying he regrets that it has come to this. Secretary Blinken announced a visa restriction policy for individuals undermining democracy in Georgia. As former U.S. Ambassador to Georgia, I am deeply saddened it has come to this. We stand with the Georgian people's right to choose their own future, he writes in social media. In an attempt to consolidate its hold on government, the Georgian Dream Party would stamp out the Euro-Atlantic aspirations of Georgian people, U.S. Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell said. According to him, in Georgia, parliamentary majority's quest for power is threatening to suffocate the nation's civil society and unravel the guardrails of its democracy. Whether Georgia looks east or west matters to the United States. Standing with the free people resisting the aggression of tyrants like Putin or Xi is in our own business. This is true of Taiwan and Ukraine, Estonia and Japan, and this is true of Georgia. The Georgian people deserve to write their own future, not to have it dictated to them by Moscow's preferred party chefs, Mitch McConnell said.
On May 22, the McCain Institute, George W. Bush Institute, and Freedom House issued a strong worded statement calling on the United States and its European allies to immediately impose travel restrictions and financial sanctions against individuals responsible for undermining Georgia's democratic development and Euro-Atlantic aspirations, including high-ranking Georgian Dream officials and their families. The organizations also stressed that Washington must stand with the people of Georgia against the autocratic actions of their government. David Kramer from George W. Bush Institute talked to the Checkpoints. Mr. Kramer, thank you for being with us and thank you for taking our questions. My first question will be, how do things look like in Georgia from the U.S.?
The situation in Georgia looks very bad if you only look at what the government is doing, if you look at what the parliament is doing. Although I have to single out the Georgian president, Zurabishvili, who rightly and wisely vetoed the NGO foreign agent bill. And yet at the same time, I think from the United States vantage point, we are inspired by the people of Georgia, as we often have been, who continue to turn out in the streets, who continue to remain pro-West, pro-democracy, anti-corruption. The people of Georgia want to move toward the EU, toward NATO, closer relations with the United States. I think the Georgian government under the direction of Mr. Ivanishvili and the party in power, Georgian Dream, has clearly decided it wants to be with Moscow. And so this is a critical point for Georgia as seen from the United States.
You have the Bush Institute, McCain Institute, and Freedom House have jointly issued the statement calling on sanctions on GD high officials and their family members. How could these sanctions help, and what type of sanctions you are specifically calling for?
In the statement that the three organizations issued, and I run the George W. Bush Institute, so we are one of them, we called for targeted individual sanctions against Georgian Dream officials and family members, those officials who are responsible for the deteriorating situation in Georgia. It starts with Mr. Ivanishvili. It includes the Prime Minister, Kobakidze, and it would include, in my view, at least based on our call, we're not part of the US government, but I would certainly recommend every single member of the Georgian parliament who has voted for this legislation. And it should include other people who are responsible for the violent crackdown against protesters, against harassing civil society activists. We've already seen today the prosecutor general has decided to resign. Maybe for health reasons, I don't know. Maybe he's scared that he will be included on a list of sanctions. I do think sanctions are coming based on conversations I've had. I don't know when. I wish they had been imposed already, but the situation has reached such a point where I think the US government has decided it is time to move ahead. I hope our European allies will do the same. One other point, if I can, what we are advocating are individual targeted sanctions. We are not talking about sanctions against the country. We're not talking about sanctions against the Georgian people. We're not advocating for lifting visa-free travel to Europe. We are talking about individual visa and financial sanctions against those responsible for Georgia's backsliding and decision to go with Russia. When Ivanishvili talks about the global war party, when he attacks the United States, when the prime minister makes these absurd claims, as he seems to do almost every minute he opens his mouth, the United States can't sit back and do nothing. We have to respond. We have provided, as you know, significant assistance to Georgia over the years, and it is time for us to say enough is enough and to stand with the Georgian people who clearly want to remain in the West.
Mr. Kramer, let me no, thank you for that answer, and let me clarify a little bit. You are highlighting this individual sanctions part and not sanctioning the country because you believe that these individual sanctions will not damage image of the country, image of its people in the country who want to maintain their Euro-Atlantic integration course. Am I right in understanding you why you are accentuating this part specifically?
Yes, you're completely correct in your interpretation, which is these are not against the Georgian people. These are not against the country of Georgia. These are against individuals in the government, in the ruling circle, because technically Ivanishvili is not a member of the government, although he's announced his return very clearly and very unhelpfully to Georgian politics. It would include him, his family. Last I've heard, he has a family member in the United States. The former prime minister has a family member in the United States. If they think they can criticize and blast the United States, claim that we are part of a global war party, while at the same time sending their children to enjoy the benefits of living in the United States, they need to be proven wrong. So this is not against the Georgian people. An average Georgian citizen who wants to come visit the United States, more than welcome. Who wants to travel to Europe, by all means. But if you have voted in the Georgian parliament for this NGO law, then I would hope that your ability to travel to the United States, if these sanctions are imposed, will be negated, and you won't be allowed to travel here. I hope the European Union will adopt similar sanctions if the Hungarians will get on board with what is being proposed. So these are very targeted, individual, specific sanctions, and not against the country or the Georgian people. The Georgian people, as I said, remain an inspiration for all of us. They have turned out in the streets night after night after night in support of joining the European Union, in support of becoming a member of NATO, in support of being a normal country in Europe. And that is only to be praised and recognized by the United States and the rest of Europe.
Mr. Kramer, we have already heard about the sanctions and the fact that the sanctions are coming, and not only like travel bans or even more serious sanctions like financial sanctions, for example, also on this bigger pool of people that are associated with GD and with being in charge of passing this Russian law, even though the majority of the people don't want this law in their country. We've heard this from James O'Brien. We've already heard this from Mr. Antony Blinken, that these sanctions are coming. But we do not see the behavior change, or even more, we don't even see the rhetoric change of the Georgian Dream. Please elaborate a little bit from your experience what that means, what it means to be sanctioned by the United States, and what might this mean for these people to have financial sanctions imposed on them.
Well, Mr. Ivanishvili wrongly has concluded long ago that he already was sanctioned. He has not been. His problems were with Credit Suisse Bank, not as a result of any sanctions imposed by the European Union or the United States. And so if he thinks it has been difficult for him already, he is only going to face more difficulty if he is included on the sanctions list. I certainly hope he will be. And for others, as I said, a lot of these individuals like to send their children to study in the United States, or to live in the United States, or to travel in Europe. They themselves like to travel to the United States or to visit various European capitals. That will come to an end if these sanctions are imposed. They will no longer be able to do so. And so they will be forced to deal with the fact that they have been sanctioned by a country that has been supporting Georgia since its independence, that continues to try to help Georgia on a democratic path, deal with the problem of Russia occupying 20% of Georgian territory. And so I think that these people are in for as the expression is, a very rude awakening, which is they are going to wake up one day and discover that they are on a list of sanctions by the United States. And a lot of people who wind up on these lists for various reasons, whether they're Russian officials as a result of corruption and gross human rights abuses, or the invasions of Ukraine, or other people, they spend a lot of time trying to get off of these lists. And I imagine that will be the case with those individuals in Georgia who were sanctioned as well. And you mentioned Jim O'Brien's comments, Secretary Blinken's comments. You've also seen calls from the U.S. Senate and the U.S. House of Representatives that the United States should impose sanctions. So this has bipartisan support. This is not just a Democratic Party issue. It's not just the Biden administration. Republicans in the Congress are calling for a tougher approach. The Senate Minority Leader yesterday, Mitch McConnell, also issued a very strong criticism of what's been happening in Georgia. Senator Risch, the ranking Republican on the Foreign Relations Committee, the same thing. And the Helsinki Commission has spoken out on this. The other point, just to add, is the United States has criticized the NGO law. The European Union and European Commission have criticized the NGO law. The Venice Commission has criticized the NGO law. The Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe has criticized the NGO law. As you know, the only government that has expressed support for the NGO law is in Moscow. And that should tell you everything you need to know about the decisions being made by Ivanishvili, the prime minister, and the rest of the Georgian government and parliament.
Another question is what will be the decision of the international financial institutions in Georgia? They are not making sharp comments about the Russian law. We understand this. We know how the international financial institutions work. And the shareholders are different countries of these banks or financial institutions. But how will this work be going on if the decision makers who have to deal with these financial institutions are on a sanction list?
So for the IMF and World Bank,
exactly.
These individual targeted sanctions will have no impact. The relationship between the Georgian government and those institutions will continue, because otherwise the Georgian people would be penalized, and no one wants to see that. So the various relationships that exist between assistance agencies should continue. There have been some people who have argued that the West should cut off these ties. I don't support that, so I can only speak for myself, because that would then penalize, the country would penalize the Georgian people. If people wind up on the sanctions list who deal with these agencies, that will complicate matters. But in my view, the assistance provided through the IMF or the World Bank or the EBRD or any of these entities should continue, because we want to support the Georgian people. We want to support Georgia, the country. We want to see Georgia succeed and deepen integration with the Euro-Atlantic community. And that would be set back if there was a termination of ties with these international financial agencies.
Yes, and you mentioned Helsinki Commission and Joe Wilson's bill, which was leaked by Politico the other day, which has a slightly different approach. It has this carrot and the stick moment in it, which means that if you do the right thing, then we could negotiate visa liberalization with the US. We could negotiate more support for the defense of the country and security of the country, and also think about the free trade agreement with Georgia. How do you like this approach, and do you think this could be a motivator? It certainly is for the people who are in streets. How about the government? Would that work?
Well, I think in principle, it sounds like a good approach. There is a lot already that the United States has done for Georgia. We've provided over $6.5 billion in assistance. But there's more we can do, and it doesn't always involve the transfer of funds. These days in U.S. politics, talk about providing foreign assistance dollars is not very popular. But there are more ways that we can deepen the relationship with Georgia, including helping to ensure its defense against further Russian encroachment into Georgian territory with the creeping annexation that we've seen over the years. Free trade agreements are tricky. A lot of countries want to have a free trade agreement with the United States, and there have not been many that have been signed in recent years. So I think it's important also not to raise expectations that are not realistic. I'm in favor, in principle, of a free trade agreement between the United States and Georgia. I would just be careful and drawing a conclusion that if there's a change of some sort in Georgia, that the United States the next day will sign a free trade agreement. That's not realistic. So I don't want to raise unrealistic expectations.
And I think the formulation wasn't exactly free trade agreement. It was something like a steady, liberalized trade relations with the US, which leads to that, but might mean a lot of things, which is not raising those expectations that you were just talking about.
Yeah, we here at the Bush Institute, we're strong supporters of free trade. We don't believe in protectionism. So to the extent that the U.S.-Georgian relationship could move in a more positive direction when it comes to free trade, all for it.
Yes, and my last question, and thank you so much for your time, Mr. Kramer. Where do you see Georgia going in the short term and in the long term? And this is also, remember, this is also about expectations. So I will be listening carefully to what you have to say.
Yeah, I think in the short term, it will depend on whether the United States and the European Union impose sanctions. It looks like they're going to, at least the United States. I don't know if the EU will be able to reach agreement. I hope they will.
However, do you think, sorry for interrupting you, however, do you think, are they negotiating this, for example, with Hungary? Because you mentioned that if Hungary comes on board, then there might be sanctions coming from the EU as well.
Well, as you know, we've seen a number of countries, in Baltic states and others, the Nordics pressing for a tougher line. Germany has come out and spoken very critically of this law, France as well. So I think generally there is strong support for a tougher line and sanctions within the EU. The question will be whether they can get over Hungarian opposition. I think it's mostly just Hungary. And so I do think that in the short term, everything will depend on whether the West imposes sanctions. If it does, then I think we will see Georgian Dream pay a price for its behavior over the past few months, even the past few years. I date this all back to 2019, when Gavrilov from the Russian parliament visited Tbilisi and spoke in Russian from the speaker's chair. And ever since then, there has been a deterioration. It's not to suggest everything was great before, but I think 2019 was really the start of this deterioration. And so I think short term depends on the sanctions. Long term, I'm very optimistic about Georgia in the long term. The Georgian people are wonderful. They're inspiring. I love visiting the country. They're incredibly warm and friendly and hospitable people. And so I hope I'm able to visit in the future without any problems and enjoy Georgia's tremendous hospitality.
Thank you so much, Mr. Kramer. Thank you for your time again.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Shalva Alaverdashvili, founder of the Federation of Restaurants and Hotels, declares that the tourism industry is experiencing significant loss due to the current processes, and the government is not interested in improving the conditions. According to Alaverdashvili, the tourism administration's message is to silence the sector instead of being busy assisting the tourist facilities amid the events. What else was new in business this week? On to Natia Taktakishvili.
Kaha Khazaradze, the founder of ICER company, says that his European partners are very worried about the developments in Georgia, have questions regarding the current projects, and think about the protecting existing ones instead of making additional investments. We had a business meeting with our French and Turkish partners. They are very worried about the recent developments and think how to protect their investments in the country. Our Dutch partners also made a phone call and said that the situation is difficult. We wanted to develop something from a logistical point of view, but they said to forget the project at this stage, says ICER founder Kaha Khazaradze. ICER Group is one of the largest and most stable organizations in the field of retail business in Georgia. The company started operation on the Georgian market in 1993 and currently has up to 1,000 employees. ICER represents international brands of shoes, clothes, accessories, as well as furniture and food and beverages outlets. Reza Vashakidze, the founder of the company Chirina, declares that the business can't develop in the unstable environment while Europe brings sustainability for business. He notes that change of political path by Georgian government puts the country in destabilization, which already has an immediate effect. As of Rezo Vashakidze, if the feeling of stability disappears, business developments in the country will lose its meaning. I left the country with my family in 1990s and returned to Georgia in 2006 because the country was aspiring to Europe. After that, I decided to invest about 150 million USD in Georgia in a rather short period of time. But what is happening now that causes uncertainty? Europe brings stability for business, Vashakidze said. LTD Chirina is one of the largest agricultural enterprises in Georgia. The company has been operating on the market since 2010. Currently, the company produces chicken meat, eggs, and chicken sausages. Bakery Dona opens its third branch in Batumi, as Tamila Bezhanidze, the representative of Bakery, told TV program Women's Narrative. The opening of a new branch is planned in about 2 weeks. The city has grown a lot, so the number of our customers is also increased. A very densely populated new district was added to the territory of New Boulevard, which led to the fact that we will open the third branch of Dona in this area, namely on Inasaridze Street, and the residents of this district will also have access to our streets, said Tamila Bezhanidze. According to her, new branch is relatively small in size, but several hundreds of thousands lari have been invested. As she notes, there are complaints from the customers that Dona is only in Batumi. Tamila Bezhanidze explains that Dona is a family business and can't expand in other cities at this stage. It's planned to employ over 40 persons in the third new branch of Pastry Dona, while both existing branches employ up to 200 people. Dona started operating in Batumi 21 years ago, and today it offers customers about 100 types of sweets. Nino Meris Mazgarashvili, the founder of small business Nino Meris Wine Cellar, talks about the need for the grant from European Union and notes that small business like theirs develop and buy all the necessary equipment with the help of these grants. According to her, the European Union is the biggest trade partner, which implies the highest level of environmental production standards. The concern of the European Union is free travel, in which a single system operates for member states. The European Union is the biggest trade partner for me. It's an economic union of member countries, which implies the highest quality standards. A single market system works there, which helps member countries to present their products in any market. Association agreement and visa liberalization assisted us a lot. Every year, more than 100 million euros is spent to increase the awareness of business and quality of products in line with the European standards, Mazgarashvili said. As of the founder of the company is currently going through the stage of market stabilization and notes that they are currently represented in Denmark and Romania. Gastrobar Daira was opened in Tbilisi in Kostova Street near Tbilisi Concert Hall a few weeks ago. The new hospitality facility combines a wine cellar made a restaurant space where the guests can taste drinks along with dishes made by chef Guram Bagdoshvili with Georgian, French and Italian recipes. As Bagdoshvili told BMDG, the Gastrobar was opened in the place of former cafe and the existing space was completely renovated. The restaurant employs up to 12 persons. The place of the restaurant used to be a hotel and we turned it into a cafe. We have organized a wine storage on the first floor. Daira combines a restaurant and a wine shop in one space. About 200 Georgian and European wines are represented here. Daira Wine Shop offers Georgian wine to customers at a democratic prices so that everyone can taste food wine at the affordable price. Daira offers Georgian, French and Italian cuisine. The menu is quite extensive, cooked from the meat products, fish and vegetables. The hall is designed for 50 persons, explained the chef. Guram Bagdoshvili notes that Daira, together with his partners, plans to develop and open new facilities in the future, although the details are not known yet. The first chicken restaurant Titila was opened in Kostova Street in Tbilisi. The founder of the company, Mariam Marhulia, told BMDG about it. According to the founder of the company, in addition to the grilled whole chicken, the facility offers a variety of products made from chicken. According to her, Titila is a new business which is planned to become a brand this year. If a person wants chicken or product made from chicken, then he should come to Titila. The main product that we sell is grilled chicken. We have bought a machine that cooks chicken on the grill without oil. We sell products
made from chicken and offer lunch boxes to the customers. The facility can host guests in its outdoor and indoor spaces. In total, we can accommodate up to 45 persons. As for sales, we currently only sell products locally. We have very friendly prices and huge portions. Soon we will add a delivery service, and we plan to cooperate with Bolt and Bolt, says Marhulia. According to her, despite the fact that they are newly opened, the interest in the facility is very high. Now the facility employs 8 people, and they plan to increase their number for the near future. The company producing wooden decor and small furniture has opened Bamo shop. Tekla Jamakashvili, co-founder of the company, told BMDG about this. According to her, the store also includes a workshop space where customers can participate in the working process. It will be a month since we opened Bamo shop in Sololaki. However, due to the developments in the country, we didn't have a promotion campaign. The reason for opening this store is that we need a space where the customers can come and buy the products. Due to the fact that we are in a tourist active area in Sololaki, our main customers are tourists. We have leased our shop space. Accordingly, we have not made particularly large investments in it, says the co-founder. According to her, one person is employed in the store at this stage. The company Bamo is a family business which was founded in 2020. They produce 3 types of products: art decor, children's toys, and small furniture. Tamar Davituliani, the founder of Hotel Garemo, declares that the number of people wishing to rest in Russia is not so high this year. The reason is related to the fears among the population after last year's hard season. As Davituliani said on the air of Business Morning, the political processes taking in the country also hinder bookings. After a tough season last year, there are too many risks and questions about Russia. In addition, the current political situation prevents business from developing properly. Wrong policies should not be followed. It hurts our sector. It would be correct to take into account people's choices and not that is guided by their own interests. From our point of view, progress is in education and education is in Europe. They try to take us to a place where there is no freedom and democracy. The businesses are focused on getting grants. They have projects that contributed a lot to our growth, said Davituliani.
We are not going to trade the sovereignty and security of our country. No blackmail can force us to take a step against our country. In such a situation, the sanctions are only counterproductive and harm the person imposing the sanctions. It was mentioned in the statement of the Political Council of the Georgian Dream Party. According to the assessment of the ruling party, the statement made on behalf of Antony Blinken and the blackmail with visa restrictions are nothing but a crude attempt to limit the independence and sovereignty of Georgia. The statement of the Political Council of Georgian Dream mentions that today the top officials of the 2 EU candidate countries, Serbia and Bosnia-Herzegovina, have sanctions imposed by the USA, although both countries continue the process of joining the European Union and there are no delays in this regard. The checkpoints talked to Lincoln Mitchell, who was a GD advisor in the 2012 elections. Let's hear his advice to the ruling party after 12 years and in light of the current situation when, by all assessment, the GD has made a U-turn on EU-Atlantic integration. Mr. Mitchell, thank you for being with us and taking our questions. I know that you are following very closely demonstrations in Georgia against Russian law. How do things look from the U.S.?
Well, they don't look great. I mean, I think in the long run, I'm feeling positive. The Georgian Dream doesn't seem to have much of a future in Georgia, but we are seeing a sharp turn away from democracy, either towards Russia or following a Russian model. I'm not sure there's a big difference there. And in the short run, that's not good for Georgia. So the question is, can the Georgian Dream continue in power through a repressive, not just a repressive law, but a repressive policy towards the demonstrators, a violently repressive policy, or will they be ousted? And of course, this is all, we have an election coming up in October, and there's an increased sense here in the US that the Georgian Dream will rely on election fraud to win it. Now, it is my view, it was my view 3 months ago that the Georgian Dream could have simply won that election. Many Americans didn't believe that, but I believe they could. I don't believe that's true now.
In this light, and I would also agree with you, this was perception of many Georgians, even in Georgia, that GD was winning these elections mainly due to the weakness of the opposition, that the political opposition that we are talking. Then why reintroduce the Russian law when you have already had stated that you wouldn't do that? And this statement was not only in front of the electorate of the GD, but whole nation and also the West.
Well, I will answer that question, but I want to be clear about this issue, about the weakness of the opposition, because that's a trope that is often used, not inaccurately. My view is not that the opposition was weak. My view is that the opposition was identified with the UNM and with Saakashvili and the people who were around him. And as long as the Georgian Dream defined the opposition that way, they had a real chance of winning. Now, my sense is that what we're seeing on the streets now is a civil society-led opposition, and if the opposition is not defined by Misha and the UNM, then they have a real chance of winning. In answer to your second question, this is something I've discussed with a lot of my Georgian friends and my American friends who follow Georgia. None of us know for sure, but I will propose a couple of ideas here. One is that, for whatever way, in whatever capacity, Russia leaned on Bidzina and said, you have to do this. I don't know that that's true, but that's certainly something we have to consider. Second, it is part of a movement that is genuinely felt in the leadership of the Georgian Dream that their future does not lie with the kind of liberal European model, right? And we've seen this, for example, in their turn towards really kind of aggressive populist rhetoric around issues like LGBT rights. We saw this when Irakli Garibashvili, back when he was prime minister, spoke at the CPAC conference in Hungary. All of these things are indicators that they align themselves more with kind of an Orban, Putin, Modi side rather than, say, a liberal, Western one. Also, Trump would be in that camp as well here in the U.S. But the last possibility, which shouldn't be ruled out, is that people who pay attention to Georgia, even if they just pay a little bit of attention, know that Bidzina is the real leader of Georgia, regardless of who actually sits in the position of prime minister or other cabinet ministers. And to think about Bidzina, a couple things to keep in mind here. One, there's a certain amount of caprice. So he comes up with an idea. It may not be grounded in anything. It may just be something he floated. And second, he frequently is surrounded by yes men, people who are afraid to say no because it will jeopardize their job or their source of income or something like that. So it is not hard for me to imagine a scenario where Bidzina said, let's do this. And even though it was a terrible idea, everybody just kind of went along with it because they were afraid, which is a long way of saying, I'm not exactly sure. There are several possibilities. We may never know, but it was a bafflingly stupid decision on the part of the Georgian Dream.
Do you rule out the role of, let me tell you plainly, like big money in all of this? Because, the term global war party, whatever that means, came out of this conspiracy that the U.S. might have been involved in the case, Credit Suisse case, and Bidzina Ivanishvili's money, and we already heard this 2 billion, right? Which is which is already a specific amount of money that we've heard about. So what part does the money, the security of his money play in all of this, or is this not a factor at all?
I will answer that question. I just want to clarify something you said. This phrase global war party, globalist, these are all anti-Semitic buzzwords. These are all anti-Jewish buzzwords. We've heard those phrases to describe Jews before. So while I don't know if that's his intention, to these old Jewish ears, that's how it sounds. And it sounds that way to other people as well. With regards to your question, $2 billion for you or for me or for pretty much anybody who's watching this is an extraordinary amount of money, much more than we'll ever see in our lives. For Bidzina, he loses $2 million. He still got $2 billion, sorry. He still got 4, right? So it's not that he needs the money, but yes, I think this is, when I talk about his caprice, it's personal. So he's upset because his personal assets are frozen, and because the line between the personal and the Georgian state is very blurred. Yes, I think it's very likely that informed this decision, not this decision directly, but his anger here.
Yes, and he definitely regards this as being sanctioned by the U.S. Well, we heard James O'Brien in Georgia the other day when he said that he was shocked to see that Bidzina Ivanishvili, such a big figure in Georgia, was misinformed that there are not sanctions, like official sanctions imposed on him yet.
Well, first of all, just to be clear, I don't speak in any way for the United States government. Secondly, for Bidzina, I think Bidzina, 1, interprets this as a sanction, and 2, is indeed poorly informed. So Mr. O'Brien is right about that, and so both those things can be true at the same time. I also suspect that, and I hope that the United States is considering sanctions not just on Bidzina, but on others. So we'll see what happens. But these are technically not sanctions, but it is not. You can see how Bidzina might see it that way.
Yes, and this was the first time when individual financial sanctions and bans on travel bans were mentioned so specifically by the high-ranking U.S. Official as the measures that the U.S. might be considering if the law is being pushed the way it is pushed by GD to this point. Please elaborate a little bit on that, what that means to those individuals and to the country in general, even though this is not sanctions imposed on Georgia, but of course the image of the country will be badly, it will be damaged, right, when its high officials are being sanctioned and on that list of sanctions.
That's right. And first of all, it's hard to really know for sure until we see against whom the sanctions are and what the sanctions are, right? But so for example, a travel ban to the United States, is that extended to the families of some of these people?
Yes, right? That's what we heard. That's what we heard.
So
individuals, broader sanctions.
Right. So can the son or daughter of a high-ranking person in the government go to school in the United States or something like that, right? So these are issues we just don't know yet. We'll see. We'll see how broadly it is extended. I think there is a real appetite in Washington for sanctions. What this means for Georgia is a tough question. There was a period, and I'm going to get the numbers slightly wrong, but from around 2017 to even as late as 2013, till around 2020, where Georgia's image in the West was no longer kind of war-torn, corrupt, authoritarian. It was more wine, arts, culture, and that was very good for Georgia. I don't know that these sanctions will destroy that image, can destroy that image. There's no question that for most Americans, if they can find Georgia on a map, it's a small country. They assume just because of where it's located, probably all kinds of inaccurate things about it. For people who are paying attention, there is a sense in about Georgia that there is a vibrant civil society, that the Georgian people not only don't support this government, but are willing to stand up against it. So a smart sanction regime can damage the leadership and without damaging the country or the people. The questions about this that come to my mind are, one, timing. Is this something that is done in response to the passage of this law a few months before the election? And if so, can we offer to loosen the sanctions if the election goes well? There has to be some incentive for the Georgian government going into the October elections to conduct the elections freely and fairly and some sense that if they don't, there will be larger consequences. So that's the challenge as the United States crafts this sanction regime, all of which occurs in the large shadow of potential further Russian engagement or intervention in Georgia, which of course would be terrible for Georgia, but also something the United States does not want.
How do you see what type of watershed this Russian law might be for Georgia? And by the way, do you regard it as Russian law? Because that is how this law is perceived by many Georgians. This is how the demonstrations, the main slogan of the demonstrations is "No to Russian law." Would you say that this law is Russian?
Well, the demonstrators are in charge of the slogans, not me. But my sense is that, you can call it a Russian law, you can call it something different. It is a law of the kind we see in countries like Russia and countries aligned with Russia. And those countries are not democracies. So again, I'm not that concerned about the name. Your question was, is this a watershed moment for Georgia?
Yes. What type of watershed moment it can be for Georgia? You mentioned several things in the short part of our interview. You mentioned GD's perspective in power. We mentioned sanctions. I mean, what could this Russian law lead Georgia?
Well,
where it can lead it?
If the law is implemented successfully, it will lead to a dampening of civil society activism in Georgia, which has really been one of the foundations of whatever democratic gains or democratic achievements Georgia has made over the last 3 decades. And that would be terrible. More broadly, this is a watershed moment because since independence from the Soviet Union, Georgia has been in a cycle. And that cycle goes something like this: democratic breakthrough, followed by a kind of euphoria, followed by democratic rollback, followed by semi-authoritarian attempted consolidation, followed by regime collapse, followed by democratic breakthrough. And at the moment, the Georgian dream is somewhere, in my view, between semi-authoritarian consolidation and regime collapse. So this could be a watershed moment in that it just restarts that cycle. And that's not good for Georgia. My hope is that it's a watershed moment because it allows Georgia to break out of that cycle. And that is why the events of the next few months are so important. My view, and I've written this and I've said this publicly, is that the Georgia dream is done. They just don't know it yet. They may still be in power for another month or another year, even another few months or another year even, but they've crossed a bridge that can't be uncrossed. And they can't, it's unimaginable to me they stay in power another 5 or 10 years. But the question is, what happens next? And this movement that we see on the streets today in Georgia, in Tbilisi and other cities, is different than 2012. And it's different than the Rose Revolution. And the reason is, one, it's much bigger than either movement. And two, it's not led by politicians and by specifically one larger than life figure, whether that figure was Misha Saakashvili, Bettina Ivanishvili, or even going back in a different way to Edward Shevardnadze. So can the civil society energy break with this kind of trap of messianic individual politicians and lead Georgia from the point of democratic breakthrough instead of to democratic rollback to democratic consolidation? And I apologize for sounding like a political science professor.
Mr. Mitchell, how do you think, till this day, Georgia and Georgia's political course, so to say, and economic course as well, was transatlantic integration. It was European Union, it was NATO, it was definitely the
part of this Western community, right? So what do you think, what it means for Georgia to be perceived, and the question marks towards its EU integration path, because we see that there is this opportunity window opened for Georgia right now. It can start negotiations and talks towards becoming a member of the European Union. And at this very critical moment, we see that the questions are whether Georgia wants this or not, at least whether the government wants this or not. How does this work for Georgia or against Georgia? And here I would like to highlight not only the political side of it, but also the economic side of it. Does this lead Georgia towards isolation, and what that might mean for the small country with the open economy, which is very well integrated into the world?
My sense is that in Europe, the leaders there see the problem, not Georgia, but the Georgian government. And they are not going to work with this Georgian government anymore to bring Georgia into Europe. But when a new government comes in, I suspect that direction will return, and it could even be accelerated. So I think we are past the point. For a long time, this government did the right things. They got an association agreement. They accelerated negotiations. They were moving forward. That's not true anymore. And my sense is that that is a decision that is going to stick on the part of the Georgian dream. So, but it's not as if people in Europe have given up on Georgia. There's a recognition in Europe, and certainly the United States, which here is relevant to NATO, not to the EU, because we're not part of Europe, that this is what the Georgian people want. So that remains a positive. You know, your second question is a complicated one, because the reality is that, you know, Russia is a client of China, right? And we certainly, you know, see this in this war in Ukraine, where China is backing Russia very strongly. And, you know, there are countries that do a lot of business with Russia and with China, and that is an engine of economic development. That's not the engine of economic development that the Georgian people prefer, but it's a truism. So I'm not that concerned about isolation, but I would be more specific about the possibility of economic isolation from the West if this government can stay in power, most likely with stronger backing from Russia beyond the beyond the October election.
Thank you for this answer, and thank you for your time. My last question. Two questions. The first one, from this standpoint and how the things are evolving in Georgia with these questions that we, by the way, didn't have years before when I first interviewed you. Would you say that Bidzina Ivanishvili is a Russian plan for Georgia? And did you see that, like in 2012, 2013, was that obvious?
I don't know if he's a Russian plant, and I don't know that it matters. I think in 2012, 2013, 2014, the drumbeat from the opposition that Bidzina was a Russian oligarch was unhelpful, because it created a narrative where the West mishandled him. Because there was, that time, a very clear opportunity where if you'd handled him right, I think things might have gone differently. But whereas he's not necessarily a Russian plant, he is someone. He is, I'm trying to say this as clearly as possible, he's kind of recovering Homo Sovieticus, right? So his understanding of the world is through a more Russian and even Soviet era lens. So, and what I'm trying to say there is that he doesn't have an organic belief in Western values, in democratic values. He has little curiosity about the West, other than, you know, France, where he has a lot of property and money. That always struck me when I spoke with him. So to some extent, it doesn't matter exactly how strong the ties are to Russia, because he clearly is is moving in that direction, and that door is always open. Again, we will see what happens after the election, because you could easily imagine a situation, unfortunately, where widespread election fraud is committed. The people go on the streets like they are today, at this period in Georgia, and Russia intervenes to support the Georgian dream, or Russia says, you either get these people under control or we're going to intervene. So the rabbit hole of obsessing of, how much of a Russian plan is he, to me is unhelpful. And it was unhelpful messaging early in the Ivanishvili period as well.
Being advisor in the past, what would be your advice today?
Well, I haven't really been an advisor to the Georgian Dream for 12 years, or since the election, really. So there's probably a reason for that. And I probably would say go back in time and get it right. But what I would say today is you've got to do a couple of things here. What is happening on the streets of Georgia is not sustainable for Georgia or for the government. So rescind the law again, open up some dialogue, and find a way to persuade the Georgian people that you will conduct the election fairly in exchange for some guarantees that if you lose, which they will, they're not harassed, expelled, arrested as they did when they won. And now they've crossed the level of criminality where they should be harassed, expelled, arrested, etc. So it's not clear. But that does, from the American perspective, what that means is that we have to provide some kind of off-ramp, not for this bill, which is a terrible piece of legislation, and hopefully it will be vetoed and won't be overridden, but for the government, because if they believe that if they leave power, they're going to be arrested, imprisoned, forced out of the country, then the possibility for real violence following the election increases. Right now, I believe, if there were an election in Georgia or looking towards the October election, the Georgian Dream would get somewhere between 30 and 35%, even 40% of the vote. I don't think they're at 20%. They just don't have a majority anymore. And with, even 25% of the vote, you probably get more than a third of the seats in parliament. So there's a lot of negotiation that has to happen. And how they handle those negotiations, and the hope that there's a productive role for the West in handling those negotiations, because you want to reduce the chances of violence, while at the same time kind of turning electoral defeat doesn't have to mean regime collapse and starting from square one, as happened in the Rose Revolution and again in 2012.
But if the regime, so do you think this regime could handle EU integration in future if it is not collapsed?
I don't think, a government led by Irakli Kobakhidze and Bidzina Ivanishvili has any interest whatsoever in European integration. But a government that has 5 parties in it, where the Georgian Dream is one of the biggest, but doesn't have the majority of seats and doesn't control, the prime minister or any major cabinet, any power ministries, that government could bring Georgia into the European Union. To be part of the EU, you don't have to have a majority that wants to be part of the consensus, unanimity, right? Think of the United States. One of our major parties really doesn't want to be in NATO. We're still in NATO, right? So it's okay. Those voices that are the kind of, it's not my opinion. I don't share these views, but the kind of populist, right-wing, socially reactionary voices that the voters that are the base of Georgian Dream support are part of the Georgian nation. They're voters in Georgia. They deserve to have their voices heard, even if you or me or both of us don't agree with them. I don't think they represent a majority, and therefore I don't think they should dominate political power as they're doing now.
Thank you, Mr. Mitchell, so much for this very interesting interview. Thank you.
Thank you. It was a great conversation. I enjoyed it.
And that's all for today. We'll meet next Sunday, 11 a.m. sharp. Before that, you know what to do. Follow us on bm.g for more news and analysis in business and economics and beyond in the region and beyond.
The Checkpoints is presented by pharmaceutical company GM Pharma.